Three, two, one. Welcome to the Lightforge. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merps. Lot to talk about today. Lots of news. If this were any normal week, I think we just go on with our sort of, analysis of the class, and we would have finished up this week, right?
We would have talked about Shaman,
Mhm.
which actually has a nice article, like a summary on Arena HS by Tashi Derp. And we would have talked about Warrior, which we all have a lot of experience with. We were actually just talking about this on Friday. Our 12-win runs, which is every non-Arena Coop 12-win run, we upload them all into YouTube. It gets edited down for easier viewing. And we have more Warriors than any other class in 2018.
Well, it kind of makes sense. First of all, our sample size is much smaller in comparison to other streamers, or streamers that actually stream Arena a lot. And second of all, at least for me, chat really wants to see Warrior lots of
Yeah,
times.
of course.
I find it fun. So
You think
yeah.
chat wants to see Warrior for you? What do you think chat wants to see from me? Every single vote goes Warrior. So that's fair. But anyway, we're not doing that because the buckets, as you know it, will no longer be there in a quote-unquote upcoming patch, which is, I keep wanting to call it patch 12.0, but it's not. It was 11.2?
It is 11.2.
Okay.
So,
yep. Go ahead.
On Thursday, so on the 31st of May, like on the last day of May, we got an article, and this was posted on the official Play Hearthstone site, and it was called Developer Insights Arena with Chris
Zerhut.
Zerhut.
Now Chris Zerhut is not a name I had ever heard before.
No. Do we know what his role is?
Nope. I have no idea who Chris Zerhut is, but he is the person who is giving the developer insights for the arena. So presumably he has, like, one, he's a developer, and two, he, has something to do with the arena, right? Like, this is a person we have not heard their name before. But it was a very well written description, I thought, of one, how the buckets currently work, and two, of what we can expect to see in the near future.
Yeah, so let's just go through this blog post, if you want to call it that, because the first part, what Chris does is, like you said, he explains the arena buckets. Also, I love that we use the buckets before, like the term buckets.
We were the first person to use the buckets, I think, the word bucket.
Yeah.
But that's because that's how we think. We always call it bucket.
I know. And not saying we caused it, but it's kind of funny that,
it was described as bins for the longest time, including by Blizzard. Right. Blizzard started with bins. Everybody else used bins. When it came up on the when the community, including Taro, was doing the data mining or whatever, it was all called bins. But I never called it a bin. I've always called it a bucket because we like the word bucket, and now it's caught on. So I appreciate that. That's probably one of the most understated things that I appreciate about what has happened in the arena this year, is that everybody accepted the word bucket.
Right. So Chris explains the existence of buckets, of which this is really the first time that Blizzard has officially established these buckets and told people how they work, right? And then he goes on to talk about arena card weight. Essentially, some cards, because of their properties, whether they're a weapon or a spell or a class card, they have, increased chances of appearing. Some cards have decreased chances of appearing because of, a nerf like Flame Strike or Abyssal Enforcer. And then he goes on to talk about micro adjustments as well, which are things, these are all three things that Blizzard has separately talked about. But, this is one of the first articles that I can sort of confidently point to. If someone were to just say, how does the arena work? Like, I just got back into the game. I don't understand this because I understand, not things aren't just as they seem. And then you can point someone to this, right?
Yeah, we should actually make a chat command on our Twitch chat that just links this article, because it is really just the latest and best information we have on this.
Right. So then he also talks about micro adjust and how that further, on
we have
top
numbers.
Yeah.
He gave actual numbers for the micro adjust range right now. It is 0.7 to 1.3.
Right. And he did say, well, remember that this gets multiplied by the card's other weights as well, right? So all those previous things. And then, so this is about as far as Chris went in terms of explaining these. We don't have a spreadsheet of all the micro adjusts. We don't have, detailed numbers, but we have Blizzard come out and saying, these are all the things sort of making a difference and sort of pulling your drafts one way or the other.
You're missing the very important thing that they kind of they didn't really squeeze in. That they actually devoted quite a bit of time in there for it, but it's basically the one thing that negates everything else they've said before. But we at least know their theory now. Mm-hmm. Their theory is that all the weights should be kind of how you expect them to be, as if it were under the old system. Like, you'll see all these cards the same amount of times, like kind of ratio wise, except for the cards that are in the below average buckets. And that will make everything else rise. But what that means is that every other bucket is proportional. So you should be offered the same amount of like polymorphs as frostbolts, as, I don't know, Cone of Cold, right? Like, assuming Cone of Cold is not in the last bucket, which I think it is in the last bucket. But I don't know. So from data that we've been able to get from arena drafts, we know the last two buckets are the ones that have decreased offering rates compared to the other ones. So starting from the third to last bucket, which is, let's say, mirror entity. So your mirror entities will be offered at the same rate as your blizzards, as your frostbolts, as your fireballs, as anything else. And then the spells that are worse than that get some kind of penalty to it that Blizzard has not confirmed, like what the actual number is, but that they do get penalties to it. They didn't even confirm that there were two buckets. They just said the lower buckets with an S. And the data that we have from before Witchwood actually showed two buckets getting knocked down. The second to last bucket getting knocked down by a little bit from where it should be, like 25%, and 50% for the last bucket. And that we know has changed, because Blizzard made all the decks a lot better when Witchwood came out, and then they scaled back a little. So I'm not really sure what the percentages are. I guess I should ask Arena Drafts for the data again, and then we'll figure it out. But they keep changing it, so I'm not sure that actually matters that much. Just know that the lower buckets, Blizzard says they're lowering it, and it gets lowered by a very significant degree. Like, it's more than 50% now by all likelihood for the last bucket, and the last bucket is and has always been literally 50% of the cards in the game.
Yep.
Because it's quote unquote below average, which means Blizzard found the average card and everything below it they put into a bucket. Yeah. All right. But one more thing I want to point out before we move on to that is that when it comes to right. I kind of sidetracked myself. What I was going for is that they did they did talk about one thing that upends this entire thing, the entire other information they've given us. So the other information they've given us is what you've described, which is how Blizzard thinks this should be set up. Their one little story that they put in is about how this is not actually how it's working right now. And it's not how it's working right now because there's a bug.
Yep.
And this bug has been there from God knows when, and it is still there, but it is getting fixed in 12.0. And if you've been listening to us talk since we had a bucket system, you would know that we are aware that there is more to these offering rates than just what they presented here. We didn't know it was a bug. We don't know if it was a feature. We're pretty sure it was just something Blizzard wasn't doing correctly, because the percent chances that Blizzard thought they were doing something to the arena and that actually happened is 0 so far. So it's not a very big surprise. But they're fixing that bug, and that will hopefully make their vision of how arena should be offered actually come true. And what that bug is, and they gave a really crappy description of it, they said it's when the buckets are very small, sometimes, because offering rates have some issues, rare and epic cards get offered more than they should. Now, they don't really explain what a small bucket is, but one of the rare cards that we know is offered, I want to say twice as much. It's not quite twice. It's 1.7 times as much as it should be offered by the odds based on the data that we have from arena drafts is Blizzard. And everyone knows and everyone sees Blizzard, right? This is one of the most over-offered cards that we know of. And that's in the second bucket, which has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, has 9 cards. So this is a bug that is problematic when buckets are as small as 9 cards. 9 cards is a pretty decent sized. Oh no, that's just the class cards. You add 5 more to it, so like 14 cards total is the amount of cards in the bucket. So if it's a problem with 14 cards, it's going to be a problem with the top buckets. So the top 1 and 2 buckets, if not more buckets, and it's a bug, it's probably scaling. It's not like it gets triggered at a certain time. But starting on bucket 2, you already see that things are going kind of haywire. Bucket 1 is even more crazy. That's why UI is offered like all the time.
Yeah, because it affects epic cards as well.
Yeah, it affects epic cards as well. They said it, that's what the bug did. So basically, up until this point, your top 2 buckets at least, and probably a little bit on your 3rd and 4th buckets, were being offered at weird rates that was due to a bug, and that Blizzard has now caught and figured out. From our perspective, we can tell very clearly just by looking at data that about what cards are being offered in the arena, and just seeing these weird numbers that are not even close to being like, that are way outside the realm of like statistical probability. So like our data sets aren't the largest data sets. It's arena drafts. Not everybody uses arena drafts. So their data gathering is not like the most robust, but we have like, 1,000 runs at this point, like more than 1,000 runs. And it's showing things like Blizzard is definitely not offered at the same rate as Frostbolt, even though they're in the same bucket. Like, definitely not even close. And it's also showing that the top 2 buckets are actually offered more than the other buckets right now, which I had thought was one of their like features, because it was like, the larger, the more like good cards, you offer them more because it makes people have more fun. And I was always a little annoyed by that. But it may be because of this bug. Because according to Blizzard, they shouldn't be, right? They should be offered at the exact same rate as every other card before class adjusts. And we're talking about Mage here, so there's no way they're just class adjusting cards up for Mage. So anyway, those are just some observations of what Blizzard is going to do. So one of the things you're actually going to see, if they don't do anything else in this next patch, is that overall deck quality is going to go down, because it's not just the distribution within each of the top buckets that's going to change. It's that there was actually a bug that's just giving you more top buckets. So deck quality overall will drop a little bit, and those very frequently seen cards will also drop by I don't know how much, but they're going to even it out within the decks as well.
Yeah. So, right. They put that kind of at the very end of the micro adjust. But this is good. This is an acknowledgement, because we looked at the offering rates of something like, UI, we looked at Blizzard, we looked at Steed, and we're just like, it doesn't really make sense, right? Obviously, people pick these cards, but there was something going on with all of the cards, and with just the numbers that we had, you can kind of math it out, and you're like, it doesn't add up to what it should be. And now we know that something's going on with rare cards and epic cards that make them appear more often than they should be, or that Blizzard wants them to be. This is helpful, and like, at least Blizzard is acknowledging this, right? We certainly didn't have this information before. And in this blog post, Chris states that this will be addressed in 12.0.
Oh, so, this isn't going to be addressed in 11.2? I thought it was going to be addressed in 11.2. Like I said, I'm getting the patch numbers very mixed up.
Yeah, so this is, he says, we have improvements for the system planned for update 12.0 to help address that. So when we get the next update...
So that's still a bug, even in the next update.
That's still going to be a bug. Great. You're still going to see...
So you're still going to see all the Blizzards and all the great, wonderful...
MCTs.
Yay. And it's a serious one. It's one that makes offering rates go almost double, at least 1.5 times what they should be of similarly offered cards. So if there's a bug and it's not going to be fixed till 12.0, that means we still don't know what each offering odds even roughly would be, because especially among the higher buckets, which are the smaller buckets. I say the higher buckets, but it's just the smaller buckets. It's the same. The buckets get larger and larger as you go down.
So Yeah, that will be for the future. However, if we're talking about the immediate future of the arena, Chris also goes on to say what changes will be coming up. Do you want to
In
outline
11.2?
those?
Nope, not yet. I'm not done with the description of what's already happening in the arena yet, right now.
Okay.
Because one of the
I
more
thought we
important...
could talk. All right. Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead.
One of the current things happening in the arena right now that we've been wondering about, and we've been wanting information on, and we've been guessing at what the answer is for like a year now, is the micro adjust, the class micro adjust, right?
Right.
They
Right.
initially introduced it as like, I think 5% is what they said. And then it was quickly apparent that it is not plus minus 5%, and it was much larger than that. And at a certain point, it had gotten to like plus or minus, I think 50% or 40%. And now we know the actual numbers for at least where it is right now. Blizzard didn't really say that it was micro adjusted, that it was going to like keep it at that level exactly, but I think at least until the next expansion comes out, it shouldn't move too much from this. And that is that it goes up to 1.3 and 0.7. So this doesn't mean that you adjust 0.7 on I mean, maybe it does. They didn't really say which cards get micro adjusted. So there's two ways to micro adjust, right? Like if you micro adjust all the class's bad cards up 1.4 and all the class's good cards down 0.7, then what you've effectively done is made the class half as good as it used to be. On the other hand, if they mean that they're only adjusting top class cards, like maybe the top 2 buckets, by this amount, then you will have the top class and the bottom class be adjusted, have a class card adjustment, or like, I guess not class card, maybe they just do the whole buckets. But you will have an adjustment there of still a 2-to-1 ratio between the top class and the worst class. And if you, so in one way you have a 4-to-1 ratio, and the other way you have a 2-to-1 ratio of how much these classes are being adjusted. And I'm not sure how to interpret that, but we'll just leave it at it is an extremely large adjustment.
Yeah.
Like
this is
it's
much
not
different.
I don't know how people hear 0.7 and 1.3. I don't know if they think like, oh, I guess that's not like doubling or whatever. But this is fundamentally like alters not just how good a class is, but like how you operate within that class.
Right. There's so Chris establishes the weight of the card as well, right? So he even goes on to say, like, not only is it the chance for you to see these cards, he says specifically in the blog post about the 0.7 and 1.3, because this changes the total weight of the buckets. This alters not only the chance for the affected cards to appear, but also the chance for each bucket to be selected.
Okay, so it's about buckets.
Yeah.
And did he specify whether it was only the top buckets or just like classes have buckets that are changed?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Like, yeah.
But yeah,
I mean,
the entire bucket
itself,
gets changes. Then yeah, that's all the cards.
Yeah.
It's not just class cards.
Yeah, even by itself, this is a huge deal, right? Because remember, the 0.7 and 1.3 are subject to the additional multipliers. So you take that and then you multiply it, and then this number like also affects the total weight of the buckets. And this is why, we see sort of all of these problems that have manifested, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like when you get a system that multiplies like like fractions upon fractions upon fractions, small like differences here or there have a big impact on the end result. And that's how, we ended up with like the Steed meta, right? And then
I don't think that's how we ended up with the Steed meta. There's no way Paladins were being micro adjusted up.
That like all of these things can contribute, and also you have a danger of like if something in the future, right, like goes wrong, you can easily this can easily snowball into a problematic meta.
I think what you wanted to go point out was the Hunter meta back with Spellstones, because that was a class that was bad, that was micro adjusted up by probably the largest percentage or one of the largest percentages, and then it became a very big problem very immediately because their top cards were adjusted like very significantly up, and a lot of those cards were like spells, right? Like spell stone is a spell, and all the secrets are spells, and so they get the spell bonus, the class bonus. The spell stones got the new set bonus back then when it existed.
Yeah. So that's essential. So yeah, now we have this information that it's between 0.7 and 1.3, much different than their sort of official word when microadjust first came out of 5 to 10%, right? I think that was their pitch. It's like
I think it was just 5%. I didn't think they said 10%.
Oh, something like that. But whether that got changed or whether, I don't know what it is, but now we know at least 0.7 to 1.3. That's what the card sort of the micro adjust multipliers are now.
So the follow-up question I have is, can they tell us? Especially because now they're not micro adjusting, they're not micro adjusting individual cards, or at least they don't want to. In theory, they're not micro adjusting individual cards, but they're micro adjusting entire buckets. Can they tell us which classes are being adjusted up by how much? That should be in some log somewhere on their website, right? That can't be hard to show. I get it, they don't want to list a whole list of cards and what their exact offering rate is, but this is a couple lines, right? Depending on what you're micro adjusting up or down.
Right. And this is something I wanted to talk about as well. The idea that, okay, so when Blizzard, weeks ago, months ago, when we knew that there were all of these factors pulling the cards in all of these directions, right? Micro adjust, spell bonus, class bonus, blah, 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 like the nerfs. When Blizzard didn't give out any sort of information at all, right? When they almost didn't want to acknowledge that any of this exists, that's a different world, right? Where essentially I thought that they were almost taking this philosophy of okay, we just want to almost pretend it doesn't exist, right? And by doing that, we don't want to confuse people. We don't want to make people unhappy, whatever their philosophy is. But now that they've put out an article like this, right? You basically, pull back the curtains a little bit and saying okay, we acknowledge the existence of all these things. This is how things work. But then they're we're still not going to tell you exactly how, how much we're pulling the lever, right?
That's weird. They didn't even tell us what the ratio of Epic, what the offering rate of Epic to rare cards was. That was a weird thing to leave out of this article, I thought. They were just and Epics are offered less than commons and rares. I was okay. You used to tell us, you used to actually tell us at least what the ratio is. And you know why they can't tell us what the ratio is? I don't think it's an oversight. I think it's a deliberate omission. It's because they don't know. It's because it's not consistent.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is why, at the end of the micro adjust section, when you talked about, they identified this bug, I don't think it's because they don't want to tell us exactly what the bug, when we look at the system as well, you looked at it, Taro looked at it, and I don't think anyone has found any consistency within the inconsistency, So, it's good that they've identified it. It's good that they're figuring it out. But also at the same time, this is one of those things in which past this point, once you acknowledge it, it also, first of all, I want to establish I welcome this. This is great. Love this article. Love the communication. But now that you've sort of opened it up, it's you kind of have to give us the rest, I would think. Once you open up and once you establish this, it makes even less sense than before, in which it made.
Well, I think there's two things to it, right? One is do they mean to tell us or not tell us, and two is how can they actually tell us? At this point, they should really just tell us everything. I understand if you don't if Blizzard doesn't want to publish their own tier list or bucket list or whatever.
Right.
That is a lot more work on their end. It may take them more time. It may take them more discussion. But something what the classes are being adjusted how is 9 lines of words. That's it. That's all that is. How much epics are in relation to rares and commons, which Blizzard has always historically told us, that's 1 line. Like, and there's not that many arena rules, no matter how complicated Blizzard makes it, right? Like, they told us what the spell weapon bonus is. It's still 75% apparently. They told us that there's no new expansion adjust. That's 0% now. In the same way, you could tell us what the epic adjust is. Like, I think the reason they left it out is because the epic adjust is inconsistent depending on which bucket the card is in. At least that's from what I see in the data that we have. That's what seems to be happening. And that's probably linked to that bug that they've identified that affects, rares and epics. And I'm betting it affects epics more than rares. Yeah, and I get it, right? Like, if there's a bug out there that's doing something crazy like this, they told us there's a bug. What else are they going to tell us, right? Like, okay.
Right. So, look, communication, fantastic. I love the fact that they are writing something like this.
Yeah.
And this is, when I think about this as well, in the past year, whenever we get information about the arena, most of the time it hasn't been any official article like this. A lot of
it's just like a Reddit response to someone's question.
Right. Which is, yes, it's official word from Blizzard, but they're not. There's a difference between them going on Reddit and reviewing something or just sort of giving out some info and them putting it front and center on their website, right? And saying
on their blog that has 2 posts a week. But still, sure. It's we acknowledge that there are people who play the arena.
Yeah.
That was not the case a year ago. Or I guess more than a year ago. A year ago, they started the acknowledgement that people did play arena. A year and a half ago, it was still very much you couldn't find anything written down that made it seem like Blizzard knew that people were playing the arena game mode. So yeah, no, I mean it's definitely an excellent thing. I hope they keep doing it. I hope they do 1 or 2 of these, probably 2 of these for each expansion, just to tell people where things are at. If there is a bug, tell us. We figured it out anyway. It's not that hard to figure out when the offering rates are buggy. It's nice to have Blizzard acknowledge that there is a bug and say that they're working on it. I don't know when 12.0 is coming out. They didn't say when 12.0 is coming out. 11.2 is apparently coming out very soon, and we'll talk about next what I think you guys all really wanted to hear about, which is about what the 11.2 changes are, and it's a very good change. So far, I think we've covered what current arena is, and this is very important because you're in the current arena, and because even when 12.0 comes out, all of these will still be true. The micro adjust don't go away, the spell weapon bonus don't go away, even though I wrote a whole rant about it. I love that. By the way, this is the state of Blizzard and Arena. The number of net upvotes that my comment that was basically focused on trashing the spell weapon bonus got is 80% what the actual post got. It's gotten to this point of ridiculousness where that's just a nonsensical rule. That's the spell weapon bonus at 75% does not work with the bucket system, which is already accounting for what makes classes distinct and what makes a good card good. So we talked about this. I don't want to beat a dead horse here. And you guys, full disclosure, me and Merps have both been against the spell weapons bonus from day one for the reason that it's a very inelegant system, and it puts a thumb on the scale for we didn't think very good reasons, but now it has no reasons, right? It went from not very good reasons to literally no reasons, and actually causing lots of problems, right? Think about all the problematic cards that were class cards. None of them have been minions. They were all spells. Yeah,
it was a bad band-aid to a problem that they saw.
They fixed, but the problem is now fixed with buckets, right? They have a much better solution to the original problem.
Yeah, but you still have this weird, in their perspective, fix, which is just creating problems at this point.
Now you're double counting.
It is only creating problems at this point. Yeah. Whether or not you believe that it was a good sort of fix to the issue before, now it's only creating problems. So.
Yeah, it's to fix the issue, we're gonna add 2 here, and then all the numbers will look good. Okay, and then you fix the bug, and this thing just has +2 on it. Well, now it's just wrong again, right? Okay, so why don't we talk about what's actually coming in 11.2, the one major change that we know is coming in 11.2.
Right. So Chris goes on and in a section labeled "The Future State of Arena." He says that we've noticed that the variety of picks isn't as diverse as we would like it to be, which that's been a major complaint, right?
Yeah.
If you look at Arena HS, if you look at a lot of the complaints in the normal subreddit as well, this is sort of the complaints of every deck is the same. Arena is just crappy constructed right now, and it's just I see the same overpowered cards over and over again. People calling it the UI meta, right? So Chris says to achieve that, we're making significant changes with update 11.2. So first, they are adding new buckets that overlap halfway between the existing buckets. So he gives an example that says a new bucket between buckets 2 and 3. Remember, there are 7 current buckets, right? So a new bucket between buckets 2 and 3 will contain the weakest half of the cards from bucket 2 and the strongest half of the cards from bucket 3. So right now, if we have 7 buckets, there are 6 new buckets, essentially 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5, and 6.5. We will have those. And now he goes on to say there will be, a total of 13 buckets. And also in the new patch, there will be 2 new buckets from legendary cards for a total of 5 legendary buckets. If you guys didn't know, there were right now there are 3 legendary buckets. And then there will be 2 new buckets from legendary cards, halfway buckets. So now there's 5. So
yeah, I want to emphasize that the halfway buckets are not any new buckets. It just takes the top half of one bucket and the bottom half of the other bucket and offers them to you. So what's really happening is they are splitting each bucket into 2 and then offering you 2 adjacent buckets. That's like the literal effect. They don't phrase it that way exactly because they think this halfway buckets concept is more user-friendly or something. But it makes much more sense to me to view it as instead of 7 buckets, we're now going to have 14. You're going to offer 2 buckets at a time. With the one caveat being that the offering rate for the top bucket and the last bucket, not the current top bucket and the current last bucket, but for the old top bucket, but for the new top bucket, so the top half of the current top bucket and the bottom half of the current lowest bucket, they're going to be offered at a smaller rate than they used to be offered at. I think it's like almost minus 50%. I think it's minus 45% or something when you work out the numbers with this new system. But that's a huge decrease. That is right.
So yeah, if you guys want to think about it in this way, so now let's think of a card that is like in the bottom half of like the top bucket, which is like a Cobalt Scalebane, right? Like a Cobalt Scalebane. That will be offered. That will have a chance of being offered if you get offered the top bucket, so bucket 1, or if you get offered 1.5, right? It's a possibility for both of those.
And almost every card in the game is like that.
Yes. But for something like an Ultimate Infestation, you can only get that if you are in the first bucket range. If you end up in the 1.5 bucket range, UI is not available anymore. So essentially, you have more chances to
almost double. You were 1 in 7 buckets. Now you're 1 in 13 buckets.
Right. So you have more chances to miss out on a UI, essentially. And then the worst cards in the game on the other side are the exact same thing. You have to hit the lowest of the low bucket in order to have a chance at the worst cards in the game.
So this brings a very interesting point to like the meta, right? Like if you're looking at what the meta is going to be at, you used to have to keep track of like rarities, right, to know what you're going to see, and now you have to keep track of buckets to see how things are bucketed to find like systematic inefficiencies and what people are like more pushed towards drafting. Like for example, 2-drops had a big issue before. It's a lot better now, but they're still a little overvalued, I think. On the other hand, now you're going to also look not just at like, oh, that's an epic card. You don't see it as often. It used to be half as often. Now who knows what the percent is, as we talked about before, but it's still less often seen than the rare cards. What's also less often seen is going to be what's in that very top bucket and the cards in the very bottom bucket, but no one really worries about the card in the second half of the bottom bucket, so you're not really playing around those cards anyway. But you will have to figure out, and it's going to be like one of the most important things as an arena player, to know the very top bucket, especially for class cards that you may be playing around. Or like, I'm guessing Primordial Drake will probably make the list, I hope, and then we'll see less Primordial Drakes, because those are the things that you can play less around. So if you're debating, for example, between playing around a Flamestrike or a Blizzard, well, if we know Flamestrike is in the very top bucket and Blizzard's in the lower half of the top bucket or the top of the second bucket, then you're playing around Blizzard, not Flamestrike. It's the same right now as if we're like, oh, that's an epic card, I'm going to not worry as much about playing around it. We'll be saying, oh, that's a top bucket card. We're not going to be playing around it as often. Minus 50% is a huge deal. Or like 45% or whatever it is. That's a huge nerf in a card's offering rate. So, and the thing is, it's not going to be like all the cards. Like, you may be thinking, oh, so all the cards that are problematic in the arena are all going to be offered less now. That's not true. Because if you think about what's problematic, like Blizzard's problematic, Explosive Runes may be considered problematic. They're not all top bucketed cards. Like Silver Sword is problematic. That's a third bucket card. Like, hopefully they'll rebucket it higher, but like it's not going to be a top bucket card. There's just no way Silver Sword is going to be a top bucket card, because I don't know, like, people still can't play with it. I have no idea. It clearly should be a top bucket card. You know, we've been putting it above Vine Cleaver since the very beginning, but it's just not going to make it. So those cards will still be there to ruin the arena, but your like brain dead top level cards like Ultimate Infestation, you're going to see a big reduction in it. And I think that's this is such an elegant way to do this. Right? You didn't have a rule that's like, oh, if cards are so good, we're not going to offer them as much. The rule that we had proposed, or like I had proposed, is to scale on not like exactly a bell curve, but to center it on the middle cards and to make it go down in offering rates as the card gets better or less. But this accomplishes basically the same thing with even like less confusion, right? Because the other buckets are offered at the same rates. So
yeah.
And it gets rid of the most problematic cards. So I really, really, really love this change. I think it's going to be very noticeable in the arena. It's going to affect drafting. It's going to affect gameplay. You got to identify these cards, because these cards effectively all have the old Flamestrike rule, the old Abyssal Enforcer rule applied to them. They're going to be seen half as often as you think they should be seen.
Yep. Totally agree. Look, Blizzard historically has not implemented the most elegant rules.
Yeah, in the arena especially.
In the arena, right. But this is a very elegant rule. So, number one, I agree. It gets rid of the tippy top cards and just the bottom of the barrel cards, right? Which is good, because those cards either win you the game, right? Or they're just so bad that they're such a net negative, right? And you know, we want players to be able to do stuff with cards. So just reducing the rate of those is good in terms of making the game a little bit more even. And like you said, it helps you with more reads, right? The player who identifies this stuff is able to use that information, increase their win rate, etc. And another thing that it does is it definitely helps address the biggest complaint that I heard, which was you see the same cards over and over again. And it's not just people are picking the overpowered cards a lot. It's what they're not picking as well, right? Which I think it's great. And it's very fitting for our card of the day.
Worgen Abomination is our card good bad today.
Exactly. But what happens is, you know, people see the same cards over and over again, because whenever you have a bucket, you inevitably have cards that, you know, you might pick it sometimes because you need it, or because, you know, you're too stacked at, you know, a certain mana cost or something. But 90% of the time, it's just not the pick. And what happens is, you know, we have a pretty small pool anyways because of the rotation, and you have an even smaller pool essentially because a lot of these cards, they're not bad cards. They're just outclassed by a lot of cards in the bucket, right?
Yep. So especially the smaller buckets.
Yeah.
Where you're guaranteed the average card rating to be high.
You just don't see so many otherwise good pickable cards. And what this does is it gives those cards a shot now, because in some buckets, like, in the because we'll still get the previous buckets, and yeah, they'll still be outclassed. But now, whenever we get the halfway buckets, now they're going up against, sort of the upper cards from the next bucket, and they'll be very competitive. Right now, they might be just in a vacuum the best card there, or they'll just be extremely competitive. And because of that, we're going to see a lot more diversity now. It's not just small pool plus all of these cards that are just so outclassed by the rest of the stuff that they're going with.
The question is not like, oh, well, I take a Cobalt Scalebane or a Meteor, like a Worgen Abomination or a Meteor. No, I'm going to take a Meteor. But where you take a Cobalt Scalebane or a Worgen Abomination over, say, like one of the good tier 2 cards, like a Fireplume Phoenix, I would.
Yeah, definitely, right?
Like at that point, you're in business. You're kind of in the right ballpark now. Why? Because you've just rebucketed in a different way, right? So every card kind of has the advantage of the rebucketing.
Right, and now it's like Worgen Abomination versus Hildnir Frostrider, right? A lot more reasonable than like you said, the Meteor picks.
I'm going to talk about one more change that's probably unintended, or maybe it is intended. It's probably intended, or like they're okay with it. But what's going to happen, and this is, I'm going to focus in on the current last bucket, which is half the cards in the game. And this goes a long way to talk about diversity in the arena, because these are half the cards in the game, and they're literally seeing less than 50% what they should be seeing if all cards are offered evenly. Now, the bottom half of that, so like 25%, it's not exact, it's like maybe like 22% or whatever, of the cards in this game that are just, they've fallen, they're not even that bad, right? Like, I mean, they're bad, but you get stuff like MVP, like, what's MVP? God, I'm forgetting MVP's actual name. I've been calling this card MVP for so long, I no longer remember its actual name. It's a Tauren Warrior. There we go. Tauren Warrior, the 2/3 taunt for 3 mana.
No, you gotta remember MVP's actual name, man. Although you know what, you at least you just identify as MVP. That's good enough. Please go on.
3 mana, 2/3 taunt, and rage +3 attack. I bring it up because if you joined the game like in the last year, you probably don't know this card even exists. It's a classic card, neutral, and it's not good, but it's not unplayable. Like, you compare this with like an Ironforge Grizzly, right? And it's like a little bit worse. It's not like terrible, but it's probably going to be below 22% of all current cards, right? Like, I think that's kind of a no-brainer. And you're just going to see this like at a half rate to what it used to be. And it was already at a half rate because it was a neutral non-class card, which have a 50% offering penalty that they've had for the longest time. That's something else that I would argue doesn't make sense, but right now there's an MCT problem, and I don't think my argument will be very powerful. So I haven't been as vocal about that one, but that's a card that'll be in the very bottom, and that's a card that I think, at least in my book, is what's going to add diversity to the arena, right? But you're going to see it less. And that we're just talking about the current last bucket that will be the second half of the current last bucket. But what about the top half of the current last bucket? Those are very playable cards. Those are basically like the cards that you think shouldn't be in the last bucket, but you end up with them anyway. Like Ancient Brewmaster is there, right? Like that's a totally normal freaking card. Why is it there? Because people suck with Brewmasters. They like kill their own tempo and they lose the game. Brewmasters. Murloc Tidehunter is there. Like, that's a very normal 2-drop. I don't even know how people screw up with it. But they probably aren't screwing up with it. It's probably just being outclassed by half the cards in the game, right? It's probably, like, number 55 percentile, right? And what's going to happen with those cards? Well, half the time you see them now, they're going to be offered with cards from one bucket above them. And that is not going to be good for these cards, because the cards in the bucket above them are like Stranglethorn Tiger. Like, they're like real legit like cards. Like Wasp. Giant Wasp is in the bucket, is in the second last bucket, the bucket above the last bucket. So diversity is hurt in two ways. One, it's actually explicitly being reduced by half. but in the bad cards, which no one's really going to cry about. But if you're one of these people that just wants to see all the cards in the arena, it's not going to be helpful for you. But the more problematic part, I think, is that your old top end of your bottom bucket, those cards are also going to be seen like half as often. Not because they're going to be offered half as often, but because they're going to be outclassed now half the time. And that is very hurtful for diversity. Because again, these two parts that I'm talking about together, they literally compose half of the cards in this game. And Blizzard is doing an additional step to basically effectively reduce how often they're seen in the actual arena by 50%. So you're talking about diversity on the top end. There's going to be more diversity, right? Like the good cards, you're going to see a more diverse selection of than what we currently have. But the bad cards, you're going to see just less of, period. And I think that's an effect that you have to consider. So before I said I think the power level of all cards are going to go down, all decks are going to go down. I'm going to stick by that because I think those overpowered cards have such a disproportionate effect on the arena. And the fact that that is getting knocked down 50% is going to more than make up for the fact that your worst cards are actually getting better. Even if you see like more of them. Because, you know, it's an ultimate infestation. It like makes a deck, right? Like you build decks around those decks. Those are the cards that's making the deck feel very constructed.
Yeah, and you can cover like those cards win you the game more than like a Wisp loses you the game. Yeah. Right.
Like Wisp is like what, like a 75 on our tier list. The ultimate, which means it's 20% less than the average random card, and the ultimate infestation is like a 250. Like it's not.
Yeah,
they're not
it makes up scale. For. Right, it makes up for so much of everything else. So, yeah, I think that's good. Elegant solution, and this should be coming up quite soon. You know, whenever we have something like this. So, 12.0, I'm guessing should be the next expansion, but 11.2, in which they're going to implement these halfway buckets and increase the total buckets to 13 for non-legendaries. I wouldn't be surprised if we were talking about this, you know, by the next Lightforge.
Yeah, I think we will be. They've historically put out the patch like the week after they talk about it. So I am expecting this next week as well.
Yeah.
All right. You have any more things to add about the offering rates before we move on to Worgen Abomination, which I actually really want to talk about Worgen Abomination.
No, look, I'm just looking forward to this, and also I want to say, Taro, buddy, I'm so sorry, man, because all the work that you did previously, you know, I'm sure it was enjoyed, and you know, people got to use it, but man, just can't catch a break. And so for those of you guys listening out there, Taro actually in the thread also campaigned to essentially like, hey, can you just give us these numbers, you know, instead of forcing people to reverse engineer them, because it's not like people won't reverse engineer them, right?
It's
like
not
you
that
give them
hard
a method
to reverse engineer.
No, it just creates work. It's work for the sake of work, right? And like, if anything, it creates this haves versus have-nots, right? Why not make it easier and also give everyone that information? And hopefully Blizzard will do that. I think this is a great step, you know, a great first step. Fingers crossed, right? I'm hoping Chris or just Blizzard in general.
But, you know who I think Chris may be like the guy, and it's like half his job to rebalance the arena. Remember that guy that I mentioned?
He's the guy.
He's the guy. Dude. Chris may be the dude.
Have they announced who is taking over for Ben Brode yet?
I don't think so. That would be like overall Hearthstone news. I don't think anyone's taking over for him right now. I think they're just like, you know, doing their jobs as normal. There's no like game director right now, basically.
Yeah, interesting.
That's just fair. There may not be like a, you know, you don't want to force a game director upon someone. They could do things by committee.
Oh, definitely. I was just curious because I just remember I was like, in my head, I was like, we haven't heard from Ben Brode in a while. I was like, oh, right. He's not there anymore. But okay, this is it. This is good. I'm looking forward to this. I'm looking forward to playing it as well. For those of you who are going for the leaderboard, once again, whenever there is a shift in the meta, whenever there is a change as big as this, it favors those of you who are devoted. It favors those of you who look at what the new state of the arena and immediately identify certain ways to get more value out of the draft than other people. Yep. Right.
All right. Okay. Well, do we have a question from the GOAT?
Oh, wow. I have been really slacking on this recently.
All right. Well, why don't you go find us a question from the GOAT?
Yeah, I will.
And I'm going to kick off Card Good Bad, because I've been sitting on this for a week, and I really wanted to talk about Card Good Bad, which is Worgen Abomination 116 on the tier list. Worgen Abomination is in the number 1 bucket. It started off in the number 1 bucket, and it is stayed in the number 1 bucket even after the hotfix, which means that Blizzard saw that some good things were happening to it. And it's a weird card in the number 1 bucket because it probably doesn't belong there for most classes, but at the same time, Blizzard probably has data that pushes it that way, because those other classes where this card would not be picked are not picked. Like, because they started it off in the first bucket, and if you were playing, like, I don't know, say, like, Hunter, you would not take a Worgen Abomination. Like, you have to be very, very, very bad to take a Worgen Abomination. And so you just don't. On the other hand, if you're in a class like Mage, for example, you would take a Worgen Abomination. And so the stats are probably very heavily skewed towards certain classes that they're naturally good with, and so that probably makes it have a decent win rate. And I'm going to dig into it a little bit more, but before I do that, for those of you who don't know, this is what Worgen Abomination is. I feel like after Crip made his video and singled out Worgen Abomination, people actually know what this card is, but until then, like, I barely knew what Worgen Abomination was.
Yeah.
It's an epic neutral minion. I remember there's no set bonus for the current expansion. It has never been. So it's a Witchwood card. So it's very new. People haven't seen a lot of it. And it's a neutral minion. So there's no offering bonus of any sort on this guy. And it's an epic. It's a 7 mana 6/6 that says at the end of your turn, deal 2 damage to all other damaged minions. So you can look at it as a mini controllable Primordial Drake, right? But it doesn't have the taunt, but it can repeat its ability, right? As many turns as you can. And one thing I hadn't appreciated until I played with this card is how great it is that it only triggers at the end of your turn. Because you get to just damage, you get to deal 2 less damage to anything else that you want. And it will deal that damage if you throw any minions in, or if you ping, which is why it's so good at Mage, any class. Like, if this card is on the board for you, your hero power basically turns into deal 3 damage to a minion. Like, that's pretty insane for Mage. And the card gets a really bad rep because it's in the top bucket, and it questionably belongs in the top bucket. But I want to argue that it's actually a pretty decent card in classes like Mage and like Druid and like Rogue. And any other class where you have a lot of pings or small amounts of damage available. Because if it sticks on the board, and it has 6 health, so it's very likely to stick on the board for at least 1 turn, you can do a lot of things with it on future turns. It will get a lot of the damage back. And we open this up for discussion. What we do now with our Card Good Bads is on our subreddit, the Grinning Goat subreddit, we open it up for discussion from the week before, and then we read all the comments beforehand. No one really thinks too much of it, not surprisingly, which is why we did this card. Hold on. I want to point this out. But we do have some people digging into the HS replay stats, which is good, and it inspired me to dig into the HS replay stats too, just to see what the numbers are or remain to be. Moxes dug into the HS replay stats and said that the highest win rate was 58% in Mage. So I checked the win rates again in Mage, it's down to 87% now. But that's still insanely high. Like, to give you an idea of how high 87% win rate is, it's better than Fireball and Polymorph. It's obviously not as good as Meteor. It's around where Flamestrike is. It's not better than Primordial Drake, but it's like Cobalt Scalebane is so low. It's like 55 or something. And my general rule, and everyone fights me on this because there's so many Scalebane lovers, but we've always rated it kind of low on the tier list. Like, we just don't think it's fundamentally that great of a card. And especially in the number 1 bucket, it's definitely over bucketed. So someone's never picked Scalebane. But Worgen Abomination performs better than that, which, if you ask people what the most misbucketed neutral card is in the number 1 bucket, and the number 1 bucket has the following cards right now: Worgen Abomination, Primordial Drake, Cobalt Scalebane, and Bone Mare. I think everyone would say Worgen Abomination by like a long shot.
Yeah.
I disagree. I think it's Cobalt Scalebane, at least for any class with a ping. I think overall, there's a good case to be made for Worgen Abomination, but if you are playing Mage or Rogue or Druid, but especially Mage because you want to take that face damage, Worgen Abomination is a very good card. Like, think of it as even if it's a 7-mana 6/6 that dealt 3 damage. A 7-mana 6/6 that dealt 2 damage, right? You just like find a damage minion or something. That's a really good card by itself, right? That's a Fireplume Phoenix. And this is now a Fireplume Phoenix with a lot of upside, and upside on future turns as well. And Fireplume Phoenix is in the 2nd bucket. So I don't know if this card is misbucketed, but it's probably, if it's misbucketed, then it should be the very top of the 2nd bucket. It's like pretty much correctly bucketed in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is one of those cards in which, when it first came out, I don't think we sort of misidentified it as any, like, we thought it was good. It's just because of the bucket system, you just can't pick it over some of the other cards, right?
I mean, we definitely didn't misidentify it. Worgen Abomination is a 134 in Mage. Like, it's below Primordial Drake. Oh, I'm looking at the new tier list. Sorry, I have a much more updated internal tier list, which I know I told you guys was coming out last week and then this week. It's hopefully coming out this coming week. We'll see. It's been killing everybody involved. But yeah, okay. Worgen Abomination on the current live tier list is a 140. Primordial Drake is a 161. Bone Mare is a 128. And Cobalt Scalebane is a 111. So we haven't been down on Worgen Abomination, even from the beginning, right? Like, Worgen Abomination has been pretty well rated by us in the right classes.
Yeah, it's been pretty good. Once again, it's just because it's in the top bucket, and the top bucket is usually really, really small, right? And not only really small, it's packed with a lot of the good cards. Who's got like the most cards in the top bucket? Is it Paladin or is it Priest?
I don't know why.
It's one of those, right? Like, essentially, I'm just trying to think, because for the small ones, there are like you never pick it because there's so many cards that are better than it. And then the chances
a Hunter has the largest one by far, I think.
It has the largest one. I guess I can kind of see some cards being worse than it in Hunter, but at the same time you're a Hunter.
You're a Hunter.
So...
You don't want to touch this card as Hunter. It deals damage on the board and is really large.
Yeah, so I think during my entire time playing Witchwood, I have only seen that card twice.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a shame because it is a good card. It is a really good card. But now that we have this, 1.5 bucket, I think we're going to see it a lot more often. So.
Oh, we're going to see, or even if we don't see it a lot more often because of the stigma attached to it, you should draft it.
You should draft it, yeah.
Because it's good.
Right.
And it says 116 there because of classes like Hunter. Look at Mage. It's a 140 in Mage. Like, draft it as such. And I think that's where a lot of people miss some value. Like, literally in Worgen Abomination, literally in the card that Crypt makes fun of for not just never seeing it, but being like way over bucketed. Like, it's slightly over bucketed maybe. But it's under bucketed if anything for Mage, if it's possible to be under bucketed at one. It's one of those super premium cards. And the beauty of it also is that your opponents will probably heavily misplay into it once it's on the board, assuming that they can't remove it. Like, I think they know to remove it immediately, but if they can't, they're not going to set up their board optimally for it. I haven't seen that happen once. I've played with this card twice. It's gotten decent results for me both times. Like, I've never like fully regretted picking it over a fireball or like a polymorph or something. I don't think I would have minded a fireball or a polymorph, but like Worgen Abomination held its own. And on the other hand, I've seen it played against me 3 times. 2 times it beat me, which is when I started gaining even more respect for it in my head. And one of which it did not do much, but yeah, it's a game-winning card 2 out of 3 times. That's pretty good.
Yep. All right. I think that's good. We're gonna see it a lot more often. I got a question from the GOAT if you wanna.
Yeah,
go back
let's
to
do
that.
a question from the GOAT.
Sure.
Before that, we got to go to next week's Card Good Bad, because now we're previewing the Card Good Bad for the week after.
Oh. Okay.
Because we're gonna be fancy and stuff.
All right.
So with all of the buckets changing, I want to do a Card Good Bad on one of the neutral cards that is questionably bucketed now, right? Like,
Okay.
I want to do Rotten Apple Bomb.
Oh. All right. Okay. I won't say what I think about that. Obviously, it's a discussion for next week. I think it's an interesting choice, right? It's a card that we see fairly often now already.
Yeah.
We see it fairly often now, and part of it could also just be because of its use in constructed, right? It is a very common constructed card right now. So cool. All right, and if you want to join in the discussion, go to the Grinning Goat subreddit and just give us your thoughts. How good the card is, how it's worked out for you, how it surprised you, and what you think about its current placement in the bucket system.
Rotten Apple Bomb, by the way, for those who don't know, is currently in the 4th bucket.
Okay.
It is in the same bucket as Sunwalker. I think that's the interesting comparison.
Oh, how Sunwalker has fallen.
Okay. So what's the question from the GOAT? Let's end on the question from the GOAT.
All right. I'm just going to take this question from the GOAT from Taro. And Taro asks, Merps, what cards do you think are in better buckets because people pick them too much? So this is one of the things about the bucket system, if you guys didn't know. Blizzard looks at it, and essentially if a card is not picked at all or not being picked enough, they consider bumping it up. And if a card is picked, if a card is picked too much, then they bump it up. And if a card is not picked, then they bump it down. So
they do it regardless of win rates. So like if it's just like everybody likes a particular card, it's gonna be over bucketed.
Right. And we saw that we saw one of those changes with Firefly, right? Firefly used to be way over bucketed.
Well, that's also probably because the win rates for it tanked after it was in the first bucket, and whoever was bad enough to take Firefly over whatever other things they were offering probably did not do very well. You add to the fact that aggro play wasn't really doing very well, period. It probably compounded the effect.
But I think some of the cards that you see people pick and it ends up being over bucketed are just 2-drops, right, in general. And part of it is because of players that really want 2-drops, they really want their early game. And part of it is just because there's not really much 2-drops for a lot of classes as well. So people, are kind of forced to take the Amani Berserker over potential better cards. They're, taking 2-drops over cards that can really help them out with the value game, that has good initiative or whatever. So I think 2-drops are a decent example of that. And not necessarily just because it's like herpaderp, people don't know how to draft. It's like there's just not many 2s. So you are going to pay a premium for them.
Okay. I'm going to say secrets. All
Mm.
secrets across the board.
People do like secrets.
People really like secrets. And that's what happens when everybody really likes secrets. And you can get into these deck archetypes, especially if you are mage, which require you to have a lot of secrets, and then they're going to pick all the secrets. And so even if it doesn't perform as well, it like does okay enough, I think, that people keep doing it and they like it and they think they're being tricky and secrety. And that's why Explosive Runes is so high. It's why Mirror Entity is probably higher than I would put it. Yeah, I think secrets, especially in Mage. I actually really like the Hunter secrets because I use them as proxies for like 2-drops. But you know, they're all also really high, right? Like Venom Strike Trap is second bucket. I don't think that's wrong, but I really like Venom Strike Trap. I think if you talk to most people, who knows the Venom Strike Trap should be in the second bucket. But Wandering Monster in the third bucket, I don't know if that's just because people are picking it. It's probably more because I had to take a Wandering Monster. Like I had to. I had a secrets based like hunter deck. I needed it to like for whatever reason, I just saw no other choice but to take a Wandering Monster. Like the other stuff I was offered were like crap, or maybe they were like too large. I already had a lot of large minis. I forget the exact reasons, but it was basically no other choice but a Wandering Monster. And so I took it. And it was really, really, really good. And the reason that the deck got to like 5 wins, and then once we got to like 4 wins, like it's just stopped working. Like once it got to like you have more wins than losses in the arena, Wandering Monster stopped working. But before that, it was like, hey, I get a free 3-drop on turn 2 every time. Like I was wondering how often, because I knew people misplay into it, but you know, I almost never misplay into it, and players better than me would literally never misplay into it. But once I saw it for myself, I understand why the win rates for this card is really high. It does not make it any better of a card, because it you know, you don't want a card that stops functioning once you're 4-2. But yeah,
Cool. That's basically it. You're gonna see this, and people have cards that they just like to pick. People have safety blankets, right? People have ways that they just like to play. So you're definitely going to see that. But
oh, how about this? How about this? Not in the last bucket, Deck of Wonders. I don't care if
that's super obvious. Come on, people love it.
Like I really, I think because Deck of Wonders is picked literally every time it's in the final bucket, it gets up here. Because I don't care if we take off the RNG penalty that we have on our tier list, Deck of Wonders is still a crap card. Like, it's a really crap card because we have a penalty for RNG, and it's a super heavy RNG card. But even without it, this is like going to be a significantly below average card in the bottom 50 cards, in the bottom 50 percentile cards, certainly. But it's not. It's 1 block higher. And I think it's 1 block higher very specifically because people kept picking it. And once it saw a near 100% pick rate, Blizzard was like, nope, we got to move it up a bucket.
I love it. I mean, that's the perfect sort of fun card that people pick, right? I can totally see that. I can totally see that, because I also see the card a lot more often than I think I should. I'm just like,
yeah,
what? I have also seen people, like some people just draft it and they play it and then they lose, right? But I have seen one person get good use out of it, because apparently they had double Dragon Fury. So they play Deck of Wonders, and it's like basically guaranteed 5-mana Dragonfire Potion.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, you know, you still pay for it, but to guarantee that's pretty good. Yeah. Or like, you know, that's not bad at all, right?
Yeah.
So I've seen that. That was kind of amusing. I lost to that, but it was fairly amusing.
Yeah. So that's yeah, okay. I think that's a pretty thorough answer to the question from the GOAT. Again, question from the GOAT brought to you by our patrons, patreon.com/grinninggoat. Thank you guys so much for supporting the Lightforge. And I think that's it. That's it for today.
Yep. All right. So lots of big changes. Looking forward to it. I predict that by this time next week, we'll be talking about how we like the new drafting system, right? How we like 11.2, and that's very exciting. So,
or we'll be talking about how Blizzard messed everything up by introducing a new bug that is so apparent that in like the few runs we'll do between when they come out with it and the Lightforge, everybody will be up in arms about how bad the new patch is.
I like it. No
one
common
or the
cards
other.
at all.
Yeah, no, one or the other, right? Like something's gonna happen. It'll have like an unintended effect or like a bug, and all of a sudden there will be 8 steeds in every paladin draft.
8 steeds, but no minions to buff it on.
Only
dudes.
That
would be great. That would be so poetic. Like you're just offered 12 steeds, but then people just be like, oh my god, I managed to get 3 minions in this draft. It might work. And this is also when wisps are just
OP.
Oh, right? OP.
Guaranteed target on turn 6.
Yeah, I know. Anyways, guys, looking forward to next week. Get your runs in before, if you want to get a good head start. Like if you just feel super comfortable in this meta, and if you want to get a head start to the leaderboards, that's fine. But the better players should be able to take advantage of the shift in the meta. So, good luck, everyone.
Until next time, this is ADWCTA.
This is Merps. See you guys.
All right.
Okay.
Fun.